I was just about to hop into a late-night shower, trying to wash away the stress of another grueling day at work, when the doorbell rang. It was 11:30 p.m. Too late for guests, but ignoring it would leave me wondering. The last thing I expected when I opened the door was to find my past staring back at me, drenched in tears. My ex-fiancée, Brooke, stood there, trembling slightly, her mascara smeared in messy streaks across her cheeks. She was the ghost I had finally laid to rest 5 years ago, the one who had torn my heart apart by cheating during our engagement. The shock of seeing her felt like a punch to the gut. For a moment all I could do was stand frozen, feeling old wounds from the past break open all at once. "Matt, please, I need to talk to you," she whispered, her voice hoarse as if she'd been crying for hours. She looked a wreck, nothing like the confident, put-together Brooke I once knew. My mind raced. I wanted to slam the door and tell her to leave, to take her tears elsewhere. But I didn't. Somehow, a part of me, the part that once loved her so deeply, stepped aside and let her in. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was a fool, or maybe I just needed to know why she was standing there, pleading. She sat on my couch, struggling to find the right words, while I stayed by the door, keeping my distance. I didn't trust myself to get too close, knowing how easily she used to break me with just a glance. Just then, my wife Jessica walked into the room, probably having been upstairs getting ready for bed, unaware of the storm that had just blown in through our front door. "Who's at the door, Matt?" she asked, and then she saw Brooke. Her expression shifted instantly, shock mixed with a hint of disgust, before she forced a smile. I hadn't even had a chance to explain who Brooke was. Why would I? That chapter of my life was supposed to be closed, sealed, and buried. But there was Brooke, ripping open pages of a book one had worked so hard to burn. Jessica's smile was as cold as ice. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "What brings you here so late, Brooke?" she asked, emphasizing her name as if it left a bad taste in her mouth. It was then I realized how little Jessica knew about that part of my past. I had only ever told her the bare minimum, nothing about the nights I spent crying after Brooke left, nothing about how broken I had been. Brooke looked at me, eyes wide and pleading, before turning back to Jessica. I need Matt's help. It's really personal," she said, wiping her eyes and sniffling, the sound grating on my nerves. Jessica raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Oh, I'm sure it is," she said, her voice like ice. "But whatever it is, I don't think it's Matt's problem anymore. Is it?" She stared at Brooke, completely ignoring me. The tension was thick bitterness, jealousy, and something else I couldn't quite identify filled the air. But Brooke didn't back down. She shook her head and turned to face me, as if Jessica wasn't even there. "Matt, please. I have nowhere else to go. I've messed up. I've messed up so badly," her voice cracked, and for a brief moment I saw a glimpse of the girl I once loved. The desperation in her eyes felt raw, like something I hadn't seen in years. Jessica let out a sharp, bitter laugh, almost mocking. "Seriously, you show up here in the middle of the night and expect him to drop everything for you? After everything you did to him?" She took a step forward, and for a second I saw a fire in her eyes I had never seen before. She wasn't just angry, she felt threatened. Jessica had always been calm, collected, but now her mask had shattered. "Jessica, I tried to intervene, but she cut me off." "No, Matt, she doesn't get to come here and play the victim. You don't owe her anything." Her words cut through the air like a blade, and Brooke flinched. She looked at me, her face crumpling as tears welled up again, and I felt torn in two directions. Brooke was a painful reminder of the worst betrayal I'd ever felt, but there was something in her eyes, a spark of the past, that made me hesitate. "I just need to talk to Matt." Alone, Brooke whispered softly, her voice barely audible. There was a challenge in her tone that I couldn't fully grasp. Jessica glared at her, then looked at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. "Whose side are you on?" This was the moment that split everything open. I could feel the past clawing its way back into the present. I had to decide whether to hold on to Jessica or let Brooke's ghost drag me back under. I stood there, caught between two storms, one in tears, the other in rage. It felt like a twisted nightmare I couldn't wake from. Brooke's desperate eyes locked on mine, while Jessica's furious gaze drilled into the side of my head. I felt like a spectator in my own life, watching the chaos unfold. "Matt," Jessica's voice broke the silence like a knife. "Are you seriously considering letting her stay here?" Her words were filled with disbelief and disgust. I couldn't just tell Brooke to leave, not like this. As much as I hated myself for it, there was still a part of me that couldn't turn my back on her when she looked so broken, more fragile than I had ever seen her. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Why now? Why me? What did she think she would find here? But I knew I wouldn't get any answers if I didn't let her speak. "Jessica, I just need a minute to figure this out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. Jessica narrowed her eyes, her expression darkening as if I had betrayed her. She let out a bitter scoff and shook her head. "Wow. Okay, I see how it is," she snapped, and without another word she turned and stormed upstairs. Each footstep echoed through the house, like the ticking of a bomb. The bedroom door slammed shut, and the walls seemed to shake with the force. Brooke let out a shaky breath, and I turned to face her. The living room felt small, suffocating. "You've got 5 minutes, Brooke," I said, my voice harsher than I intended, but I couldn't help it. The tension, the confusion, Jessica's look, all of it was tearing me apart. Brooke nodded, her eyes swollen and red, her hands clasped tightly as she stared at the floor, silent for a moment, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "Matt, I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know what I did leaving you. Everything, it was unforgivable," she began, her voice shaky. "But I have nowhere else to go. I left him," I blinked, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "Left who, Brooke?" I asked, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my tone. "The guy you cheated on me with? The one you left me for?" Her face tensed at my words and she looked away, shame clear in her expression. "Yes," she whispered. "Travis. We got married and for a while I thought I was happy. But then things got bad. He started drinking, getting violent." Her voice broke and tears streamed down her face again, unchecked. She looked so different from the Brooke I had known, the one who had been so sure of herself, so unshakable. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the surge of emotions her words brought up. I remembered Travis, the man who had shown up at our engagement party, the one she swore was just a friend. I recalled how she looked at him when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way they shared jokes I didn't understand. The memory burned like ash now, and anger rose inside me, threatening to boil over. "So what? You thought you'd show up here and I'd just take you back in?" I asked, the words coming out harsher than I intended. Brooke flinched, and for a moment I almost regretted saying it. Almost. "No, I didn't. I know you won't forgive me." "I know that," she said, her voice cracking. "But I don't have anywhere else to go. I just need a place to stay for a few days, until I figure things out." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something raw, something broken that I had never seen in her before. Before I could say anything, a loud sound echoed from upstairs, a door slamming. Then Jessica's voice, sharp and furious, cut through the silence. She was coming down the stairs. And she wasn't alone, she was carrying a suitcase. My stomach sank. "Jessica, what are you doing?" I called, but she didn't stop. She reached the bottom of the stairs, her face full of rage and heartbreak. She didn't even glance at Brooke, her eyes were locked on me, filled with anger that cut straight to my core. "What am I doing?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm leaving, Matt. Clearly you've got unfinished business here," she said, gesturing toward Brooke, her hand trembling. "I'm not going to stick around while you play hero for her." Her words hit me like a slap. "Jessica, wait, this isn't—" I began, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "No, Matt, I've spent years loving you, trusting you, and you can't even choose me over the woman who destroyed you once." Her voice wavered for a moment before she swallowed hard and set her jaw again. "I'm not going to be second place in my own marriage." Brooke sat quietly, her eyes darting between us, tears still falling down her cheeks. I felt my world collapsing around me. Jessica was leaving, Brooke was here, and I didn't know how to make any of it right. I had thought the worst was over 5 years ago when Brooke left, but now, watching Jessica roll her suitcase toward the door, I realized the worst was happening right now. "Jessica, please, just give me a chance to explain." I pleaded, stepping toward her, but she shook her head, her expression firm. "You already made your choice, Matt," she said, and with that, she turned, opened the door, and walked out. The sound of the door slamming echoed in the silence, like the final blow to everything I knew. It was the sound of my life falling apart. Brooke remained on the couch, quietly sobbing, and all I could do was stand there, staring at the door Jessica had just closed behind her. The house felt emptier, colder, like all the warmth had vanished in an instant. The silence left by Jessica's departure was unbearable. I turned to Brooke, still sitting on my couch, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped. She was a ghost of everything I had once loved, and now somehow the cause of everything falling apart around me once again. "You need to leave," I said, breaking through the thick tension hanging in the room. Brooke looked up, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what I had just said. "Matt, please." "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. She looked fragile, like she was barely holding herself together. For a moment pity tried to find its way to me, but I pushed it away. I had given Brooke too much pity before, too much forgiveness, and all it had done was leave me trying to pick up the pieces of myself. Jessica had been right. I didn't owe Brooke anything anymore, not now. "You need to leave," I repeated, more firmly this time, though my hands shook, and I shoved them into my pockets to steady myself. Brooke's face crumpled, and she shook her head, more tears forming in her eyes. "Please, Matt, just give me tonight. Just one night to figure things out," she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. "I don't know where else to go. Travis, he'll come looking for me. He's dangerous, Matt. I'm scared." Her words hung in the air, heavy with fear. Despite every instinct telling me to send her away, a small part of me hesitated. Fear, real, palpable fear, was something I could still recognize in her, something that might be genuine. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Fine," I muttered. "One night. That's it." I knew I was probably making another mistake, but the panic in her eyes, wide and desperate, made me pause. I wasn't willing to send her back to a man who might hurt her, no matter what had happened. I wasn't that kind of person. I couldn't ignore someone in real danger. Brooke nodded, relief washing over her as she wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, but I didn't respond. I just turned away, feeling utterly drained, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I needed space, I needed air. I walked into the kitchen, leaving Brooke in the living room. I needed something: water, distraction, anything to stop myself from falling apart. I grabbed a glass, filled it with water at the sink, and took a long drink, trying to numb the ache building inside me. My mind kept circling back to Jessica, the way she had looked at me as though she'd already made her decision, as if I had failed her in the worst way. I couldn't fault her for feeling that way. I had stood there, torn between the woman who had shattered me and the one who had tried to help me heal, and in the end I had let both down. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Brooke standing in the doorway. She looked lost, her eyes swollen from crying, her body trembling slightly with nerves. She was still that heartbreaking mix of beauty and fragility that once tugged at my heartstrings, but now it only left me feeling empty. "Matt, I'm truly sorry," she said softly, her voice barely holding steady. "For everything. I know I've messed up so badly, and I know I don't deserve anything from you." She paused, her voice quivering. "But I didn't know where else to go. You're the only person I know who's ever been kind enough to give me a chance." "Kind?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Brooke, if I were kind, I wouldn't be standing here with you. I'd be upstairs with my wife, trying to stop her from leaving me because of you." The words spilled out, fueled by the anger that had been simmering inside. I slammed the glass onto the counter, the sharp sound echoing through the kitchen. Brooke flinched, her eyes widening, tears threatening to fall again. "Matt," she began. "No, Brooke, stop," I interrupted sharply, cutting her off. My chest felt tight, all the feelings I had buried for years threatening to explode. "You don't get to come back into my life and pretend you care. You don't get to walk in here and tear everything apart just because your life has fallen apart." She stared at me, stunned, and the silence that followed was deafening. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rage and sorrow twisting inside me, but then she stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch me. I stepped back. "Don't," I growled, my voice low. "You don't get to do that anymore, Brooke." She let her hand fall, her face crumpling as more tears welled up in her eyes. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm scared, Matt. I don't have anyone else," she said, her voice shaking with fear. There it was again, the vulnerability, the desperation, the same expression she'd given me 5 years ago when she said she needed to leave. The same look when she walked out of our engagement to be with someone else. I turned away, unable to face her any longer. "You can stay the night," I said, my voice hollow and exhausted, "but you have to leave in the morning. I mean it." I could hear her sniffling, a soft, shaky thank you slipping out, but I didn't reply. I walked past her, out of the kitchen, needing to escape the memories she was dragging back to life. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, until I reached the door of my bedroom, the one Jessica had slammed shut not long ago. I opened it and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as she had left it: the open closet, the empty hangers where her clothes had been, the scattered shoes she'd pulled out in a rush. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, the weight of everything finally crashing down on me. The room still smelled like her, and that was the hardest part, the reminder that she had been here, and now she was gone. I didn't know if I could ever get her back. And downstairs, Brooke was still there, the ghost I had allowed back into my life, destroying everything I'd tried to build since she left. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the moonlight fade and dawn slowly creep in through the curtains. My thoughts were a chaotic swirl of Jessica's angry face, Brooke's pleading eyes, and the unanswerable question that haunted me: why did I let her in? The house felt unbearably silent, Jessica's absence echoing in every corner. I stared at the empty side of the bed, the pillow still indented from where her head had rested. The emptiness beside me felt like a vast chasm, impossible to bridge. After what seemed like hours of staring at nothing, I forced myself to move. I couldn't just sit there, drowning in the loss. I had to do something, though I didn't know what. I made my way downstairs, expecting to find Brooke asleep on the couch. But instead she was sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in one of my old hoodies, her hair messy, her eyes swollen from crying. When I walked into the room, she looked up, her eyes searching my face, as if looking for some sign, maybe forgiveness, maybe just acknowledgement, but I had nothing to give. "Morning," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. She was trying to smile, but it looked forced, strained. I ignored her, heading straight for the counter to start the coffee machine. I needed something to cut through the exhaustion, something to focus on besides the whirlwind of emotions tearing me apart. "Matt, I know you're angry with me," Brooke continued, her voice cracking. "I know you probably hate me, and I wouldn't blame you if you did." I could feel her eyes on my back, waiting for me to say something, but I didn't turn around. The coffee machine hummed, filling the air with the scent of brewing coffee, but it did nothing to ease the tension hanging between us. "Brooke, I don't have time for this," I finally said, my voice rough from the sleepless night. I turned around, leaning against the counter, crossing my arms. "You asked for a place to stay, and I gave you one night. That's all." Her face fell, and she looked down at her hands, twisting them together. "I understand," she whispered, "but I need to tell you why I came. Why it had to be you." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "Brooke, I don't care why you came. You made your choices," and I moved on. The words felt hollow, even as I said them. How much had I really moved on if I was standing here, letting her back into my life? She shook her head, tears filling her eyes again. "Please, Matt, just listen. It's not just about Travis. It's about us. About everything." "I never told you," Brooke began, her voice filled with a desperation that went beyond fear, something deeper, like remorse. "I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to be dragged back to that place, to the heartbreak, the betrayal, and those endless nights of wondering why I wasn't good enough." "It's too late, Brooke," I said coldly. "Whatever you have to say doesn't matter anymore. You made your choice 5 years ago, and I made mine when I let you walk out of my life. You don't get to come back now and stir this all up again." She winced at my words, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Matt, I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed what we had, but I was scared. Travis made me feel like I didn't have a choice, like if I didn't stay with him I'd be nothing. And now it's even worse, Matt. He threatened me. He said if I left he'd find me. He said he'd hurt me." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to see her as the victim in this whole mess. But another part, the part that still remembered how she had looked at Travis at our engagement party, wondered if she was spinning another story, just another excuse to get what she wanted. She had always been good at that, making herself look like the victim, making me feel like it was my job to save her. "Brooke, you need to understand something," I said, my voice hardening. "Being scared doesn't erase what you did to me. It doesn't make it okay that you left without a word, leaving me to pick up the pieces while you ran off with him." I could see my words hitting her, her face crumbling, but I didn't stop. "I loved you. I would have done anything for you. And you threw it all away. You picked him, Brooke. And now you want me to save you from that choice?" She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with hopelessness. "I know," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you, Matt. I have no one else." Her voice cracked as she pleaded, and that helplessness stirred something in me. But I forced myself to stay firm. I couldn't let her back in. Not again. Not after everything. I took a deep breath, letting the silence grow before I responded. "You can stay until you figure out where to go, but that's it. I'm not getting involved with whatever is going on with Travis. You need to understand that." My words were final, drawing a line between us that I wasn't going to let her cross again. Brooke nodded, tears still falling, but she didn't argue. She just looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumped, as though the weight of everything had finally broken her. I stood there for a moment, feeling a mixture of pity and anger, pity for who she had become, and anger for how she had dragged me back into her chaos. The coffee machine beeped, and I turned away, pouring myself a cup. The warmth of the mug in my hands grounded me, reminding me that I was still here, still standing despite everything that had unraveled in the past 12 hours, despite Brooke being back and Jessica walking out. I was still breathing. I took a sip, letting the bitterness of the coffee cut through the ache in my chest. I heard Brooke rise from her seat, her footsteps soft as she approached the doorway. She paused there, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Matt, I mean it. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I kept my focus on the coffee, listening as her footsteps retreated, fading into the background. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing down on me. It was strange how, in just a few hours, everything I thought was solid in my life had completely fallen apart, and now I was left standing in the wreckage, with no idea how to piece it all back together. That afternoon I left the house. I needed air, needed to escape the suffocating weight of everything that had happened. I wandered through the neighborhood, my steps heavy, my mind replaying every word, every tear, every slammed door from the night before. The crisp autumn air, the bright sunshine, normally it would lift my mood, but today it felt like the world was mocking me, all warmth and joy while I unraveled. I ended up at a coffee shop a few blocks away. I ordered another black coffee, more out of habit than anything, and sat by the window. My phone sat on the table in front of me, and I kept glancing at it, hoping for a text, a missed call, anything from Jessica. But the screen stayed dark, empty. It was foolish to think she'd reach out after everything that had happened, after the way she looked at me last night. I wasn't sure if she'd ever come back. The thought hit me like a punch, the pain sharp and almost physical. The doorbell chimed, and I glanced up absently. My eyes landed on a familiar face, one that shouldn't have been there, Travis. He had just walked into the coffee shop, his eyes scanning the room, that same arrogant smirk plastered on his face. My heart skipped a beat. What the hell was he doing here? He hadn't noticed me yet, so I watched him move to the counter, ordering a drink. He seemed relaxed, casual, like he didn't have a care in the world. It made my blood boil. This was the man Brooke had left me for, the one who had supposedly become a nightmare for her. He looked far too smug, too at ease to be the monster Brooke had described. Before I even realized what I was doing, I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked straight toward him. He looked up, startled, and for a moment his eyes widened in recognition. But then that smirk returned, and he leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, if it isn't Matt," he drawled, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Didn't expect to run into you here." "What are you doing here, Travis?" I asked, my voice low, barely controlled. I could feel the tension coiling in my body, my fists clenched at my sides. The fact that he had shown up like this, the possibility that he was here for Brooke, set something off inside me. "Just grabbing a coffee." "Is that a crime now?" He raised an eyebrow, the smirk never leaving his face. He was toying with me, taunting me, and I felt a surge of anger rise, stronger than anything I had felt in years. The kind of anger that had been buried deep inside me since Brooke left began to surface. "Brooke told me what's been going on," I said, stepping closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's scared of you, Travis. She said you've been threatening her." His expression shifted for a brief moment, a flicker of annoyance, something darker, and then he laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Oh, she told you that, her?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Brooke always was good at telling her little stories, always making herself the victim. He shook his head, a sneer twisting his lips. Let me guess, she's staying with you, right? Running back to her old safety net. His words hit me hard, the way he casually dismissed her fear as if she was just another problem to deal with. It made my skin crawl. But worse, it made me question everything Brooke had said. Was she lying? Was this just another one of her manipulations? I didn't want to believe it, but the way Travis spoke, how he seemed to know exactly how to twist the knife, left me with a nagging doubt I couldn't shake. Get out of here, Travis, I said, my voice unsteady. Just leave her alone. Whatever happened between you two, it's over. He laughed again, his smile cruel. Oh, you think it's that simple? You think you can just step in and play hero again? He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Brooke's made her choices, Matt, and you're a fool if you think she's changed. She's always been like this, running when things get tough, pitting people against each other to get what she wants. I clenched my jaw, my fists tightening at my sides. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that smug grin off his face, but I knew it wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't help Brooke, and it certainly wouldn't bring Jessica back. Travis must have seen the anger in my face, because his smirk grew wider. He took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Fine, whatever. I'll leave you two to your mess. Just remember, Matt, people don't change. You'll see that soon enough. With that, he turned and strolled out of the coffee shop, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, mind racing. I stayed frozen for a moment, staring at the door, trying to make sense of everything he had said, to figure out what was truth and what were lies. I returned to my table, sinking into the chair, my coffee now cold and forgotten. Travis's words echoed in my mind. She's always been like this. The doubt gnawed at me, growing stronger with every passing second. Had Brooke really changed, or was this just another one of her games to get what she wanted? I thought about Jessica, about the way she had looked at me when she left, the anger and hurt in her eyes. She had seen it, hadn't she? She had seen what I was too blind to notice, that Brooke hadn't changed, that she was still capable of wrecking everything in her path. And I had let her back in. I had allowed her to sit in my home, sleep under my roof, and now I didn't even know if anything she'd told me was true. I had to get back. I had to know if Brooke had lied to me again, if I was just another pawn in her twisted game. I left the coffee shop, my mind spinning, heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. When I got home, the front door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. My stomach tightened with dread. Brooke, I called out, stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. I walked into the living room, scanning the space, and that's when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by old photos, her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me, startled, her eyes wide. Matt, I didn't mean to go through your things, she said, her voice trembling. I found these, and I couldn't help it. She held up a photo of me and Jessica, taken on our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so carefree. It felt like a lifetime ago. Why are you doing this, Brooke? I asked, my voice raw with emotion. I could feel the anger and confusion boiling up inside me. Why are you here? What do you really want from me? She stared at me, her eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. I don't know, Matt, she whispered. I thought I needed you. I thought you were the only one who could help me. But now, I see what I've done. I've hurt you all over again, and I didn't even mean to. Her voice broke as she looked down at the photo, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that she was sincere, that her tears were real, that her regret was genuine. But Travis's words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the doubt. People don't change. I knelt down, picking up the scattered photos, my hands trembling. You need to leave, Brooke, I said, my voice breaking. You can't stay here anymore. I can't do this again. I can't lose everything because of you. She looked up at me, her face crumpling, and for a fleeting moment I saw the Brooke I had once loved, the one I had wanted to spend my life with. But that version of Brooke was gone. She had been gone for a long time. All that was left was this broken shell, this chaos she carried with her wherever she went. Where will I go, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know, Brooke, I replied, standing up, the weight of everything pressing down on me. But you can't stay here. I need to fix what's left of my life, and I can't do that with you around. She didn't argue. She just nodded, silent tears streaming down her face as she began to gather her things. I stood there, watching, my heart breaking all over again, not just for her, but for everything she had taken from me and everything I had lost by letting her back into my life. The next few hours passed in a blur. I stood in the doorway, watching Brooke slowly pack up the few belongings she had brought with her. Her movements were hesitant, as if she was hoping I'd change my mind at the last second, tell her she could stay, that we could somehow fix this. But I remained silent, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe. My resolve held firm, even though each passing second felt like it was tearing me apart. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. Brooke zipped up her bag, her eyes flicking toward mine, filled with something that resembled regret. She opened her mouth, maybe to say goodbye, maybe to plead one last time, but I shook my head before she could speak. "Brooke, there's nothing left to say," I murmured, my voice heavy. "You need to go. And you need to let me go too. We're done." The words were like lead on my tongue, but I forced them out. They were necessary, maybe the only thing that could truly bring this chapter to an end. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, but for the first time she didn't argue. She took a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of everything was too much. Then she walked toward the door. For a brief moment she paused, her hand resting on the knob, as though she was clinging to something unsaid, a memory that hadn't quite faded. But there was nothing left between us, not anymore. She opened the door, and a gust of cool evening air swept into the room, chilling it for a moment. Then, just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there, staring at the empty space she had left behind, feeling a hollowness that was almost overwhelming. It wasn't like the sharp, immediate heartbreak from before when I had lost her to someone else. This was different, quieter, deeper, like standing in the ruins of something you once called home. I moved to the window, just in time to see Brooke's figure fading into the distance, swallowed by the shadows. I let out a long breath, one I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and turned away, letting the curtain fall back into place. The house felt too quiet, unnervingly still. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, echoes of Jessica's voice, her anger, her disappointment. I had lost her, and that realization was almost unbearable. As I scanned the living room, my eyes caught something I hadn't seen before, a photograph half hidden under the couch where Brooke had been sitting. I bent down and pulled it out, feeling a lump rise in my throat. It was a picture of Jessica and me from last Christmas. We were sitting by the tree, she in one of those ridiculous holiday sweaters I used to mock but secretly loved. I was holding her close, and we were both laughing, genuine, carefree happiness that now seemed impossible to recapture. I sank down onto the couch, staring at the photo, my vision blurring. Every choice I'd made over the past 24 hours had led me to this moment alone, clinging to a memory that felt further out of reach with each passing second. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, my heart leaping into my throat when I saw Jessica's name flash on the screen. A text, just one line, simple but enough to make my chest tighten. "I'm coming by tomorrow to get the rest of my things. Please don't be here." I read it once. Then again, the words cutting through me with brutal clarity. There was no anger in her message, no accusations, just the cold finality of her decision. She was done with me, and there was nothing left for me to say that would change her mind. I wanted to reply, to beg her to let me explain, to tell her I had sent Brooke away, that I wanted her back more than anything, but what good would it do? Jessica had trusted me, and I had shattered that trust by letting Brooke back into my life. She had asked me to choose, and in my hesitation I had chosen wrong. I typed out a response, my hands trembling. "I understand. I'm sorry," it was all I could say, maybe all she'd allow me to say. I hit send, the words feeling hollow and meaningless. I placed the phone back on the table and sat there, staring at the floor, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The hours blurred together. I couldn't stay still, couldn't remain in that living room, surrounded by the remnants of everything Jessica and I had built. I paced through the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Eventually, I found myself in my bedroom. The closet was still open, Jessica's side now empty, her clothes and shoes gone. I walked over, running my fingers along the hangers that remained, the emptiness of the space a dull ache in my chest. Little reminders of her were still everywhere, a book on the nightstand, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, a pair of earrings she had left behind in her rush to leave. I picked up the earrings, turning them over in my hands, the cool metal against my skin. And that's when it hit me, sudden and brutal. She was really gone. Not just for the night, not just to cool off, but truly gone. And it was all because I couldn't let go of the past, because I had let Brooke's tears and apologies manipulate me into making the wrong choice. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, still holding the earrings. And for the first time since all of this had started, I let myself break. The tears came slowly at first, then faster until I was sobbing, my shoulders shaking as the weight of everything became too much to bear. I had lost the woman I loved because I hadn't been strong enough to let go of someone who had already broken me once before. When the tears finally stopped, I felt empty, drained. I looked at the earrings in my hand, then gently placed them on the nightstand. I couldn't keep doing this, holding on to pieces of people who were no longer part of my life. I had to let go, not just of Brooke, but of the version of myself that had always tried to save her, always willing to sacrifice everything for someone who didn't deserve it. I stood up, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and walked out of the bedroom. The house was still and quiet, but for the first time it didn't feel like it was suffocating me. It was empty, yes, but maybe that was exactly what I needed, a blank slate, a chance to rebuild from the ruins. I made my way to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The night air was cool and crisp, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I could breathe again. I stood there, looking up at the stars, letting the calm of the night settle over me. I didn't know what would happen next, whether Jessica would ever come back, or if I would ever find a way to make things right, but for the first time I felt like I could move forward, like I could finally release the ghosts that had been haunting me for so long. Brooke was gone, and Jessica was gone too, at least for now. And all that was left was me alone, but maybe, just maybe, ready to begin again. Morning arrived quietly, the kind of stillness that made everything feel as if time itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. Instead, I had spent the night on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, bracing myself for what was about to happen. Jessica had texted that she'd come by today to gather her things, and I knew that meant I had to be somewhere else. I stood up, my body aching from the uncomfortable position, and ran a hand over my face. The exhaustion clung to me, but the thought of seeing Jessica, of having to meet her eyes as she walked out of my life for good, was enough to push me into action. I needed to leave before she arrived. I couldn't put either of us through more pain than I already had. Moving through the house on autopilot, I grabbed my keys, phone, and anything else I might need for the next few hours. The house was strangely quiet, a calm I knew wouldn't last long, more like the stillness before the final storm. I scribbled a note for Jessica and left it on the kitchen counter, where she'd easily find it. It was short: "I'll be out. I'm sorry for everything." The words felt hollow, but I had nothing else left to offer. Without giving myself time to rethink it, I walked out the front door. The morning sunlight momentarily blinded me as I stood on the porch, door closing behind me. I took a deep breath, then turned and walked away, not daring to look back. I had no destination in mind. I just drove, letting the streets and traffic lights decide my path. The city was waking up, people walking their dogs, heading to work, going about their routines as if everything was normal. I envied them, their simple lives, unaware of the emotional wreckage that had unfolded in my home over the past 2 days. Eventually, I found myself at a park I used to visit with Jessica when we first started dating. It was a quiet place, with a path that circled a small lake and benches set every few yards to sit and watch the ducks glide across the water. I pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there, letting the memories flood back. I remembered bringing Jessica here one crisp fall afternoon when we'd only been together for a few months. She had packed a picnic, complete with a red and white checkered blanket, sandwiches, and wine. We spent hours talking, laughing, and feeding bread to the ducks until the sun set, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and purple. I remembered thinking even back then that I could spend the rest of my life with her. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. It was incredible how one person's presence could change everything. Letting Brooke back into my life had destroyed everything I had built with Jessica. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing, trying to be compassionate, but now I saw the truth. I had been selfish, clinging to a past that had no place in my present, and in doing so I had lost the one person who truly mattered. I got out of the car and walked down to the lake, finding a bench still damp with dew. I didn't care. I sat down, letting the cold seep through my jeans as I watched the water, the ducks lazily drifting in the ripples. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, my heart racing when I saw it was from Jessica. "I'm here. Just wanted you to know I pictured her moving through the house, gathering her belongings, the life we had shared piece by piece." The thought hurt deeply, but I knew she deserved the space to do it alone. It wouldn't have been fair for either of us if I stayed, watching her pack away our life together. I typed out a response, my fingers trembling okay. Take your time, I hit send and stared at the screen, though I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe a sign that everything would somehow be okay, a message telling me she still cared. But deep down, I knew that wasn't coming. Not now. Maybe not ever. I tucked my phone back in my pocket and leaned back against the bench, closing my eyes against the brightness of the sun. The wind rustled the leaves above me, and I listened to the sound, letting it calm me. There was a finality to today. Jessica was taking the last of her things, and I had to let her go. I had to let go of everything. I didn't know how much time passed, but eventually my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, feeling a tight knot in my stomach, and saw another message from Jessica. I'm done. I left my keys on the counter. Take care of yourself, Matt. Her words cut deep, sharp and precise, leaving a wound that I couldn't escape. Take care of yourself. It felt so distant, so final. I wanted to ask her to stay, to fight for us, but I knew it was pointless. She had given me every chance, and I had squandered them all. I typed out a reply. You too, Jess. I'm sorry. I stared at the message for what felt like forever before hitting send. It felt like goodbye. And maybe it was not just to Jessica, but to everything I had tried to hold on to. The park was still quiet, the lake calm, and I took a deep breath of the crisp air, letting it fill my lungs. Maybe, just maybe, losing everything was the only way I could figure out who I was without Brooke, without Jessica, without anyone to define me but myself. The sun was higher now, warming the air. I stood up, brushing the dew from my jeans, and walked back to the car, my steps slow but steady. I got in and started the engine. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time that felt okay. I drove out of the parking lot, leaving the park, the memories, and everything that had brought me to this point behind. I wasn't sure what the future held, but maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to find out. When I got back home, the silence had a different weight to it. This wasn't just a pause, it was the end. I stepped inside, my eyes instinctively drifting to the spot where Jessica's keys always hung, and the empty hook hit me like a punch. She was really gone. This was my new reality. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. The air still carried the faint scent of her lavender, her favorite, and something else, something warm and familiar that made my chest ache. I wanted to hold on to that scent, to breathe it in forever, but I knew it would fade, just like everything else. I forced myself to move, one step at a time, until I reached the living room. The couch was empty, but I could almost see her there, curled up with a book, her face lighting up when I walked in. I turned away, unable to bear the sight, and walked into the kitchen. The note I had left for her still sat on the counter, untouched. I crumpled it in my hand and tossed it into the trash. It was too late for notes, for apologies that would never be enough. I made myself a cup of coffee, the familiar routine grounding me in the present. The sound of the coffee machine, the warmth of the mug in my hands, it was something solid, something real, and I clung to it. I took a deep breath, leaning against the counter, staring out the window at the backyard. It looked the same as it always had, but it felt different now, like it no longer belonged to me. This life felt unrecognizable, and so did the person I had become over the past few days. I carried my coffee to the dining table and sat down, staring at the empty chair across from me. This was where Jessica and I had shared countless meals, laughing, talking, planning our future together. Now it was just me, alone, surrounded by memories that hurt too much to hold on to. My phone buzzed on the table, and I instinctively reached for it, my heart skipping for a brief moment, always hoping, despite everything, that it might be Jessica. But it wasn't. It was a message from an unknown number. Matt, it's Brooke. I just wanted to thank you for everything. I know I messed up, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm going to try to make things right for myself now. I hope you can find happiness too. I stared at the message, a wave of conflicting emotions rising inside me: anger, sadness, pity, but mostly I felt drained. Brooke had always been like this, making mistakes and then trying to apologize as if that could fix everything, as if words could undo the damage. I wanted to be angry with her, but I couldn't. She was just as lost as I was, and maybe that's why I had let her back into my life, because a part of me thought I could save her, even though I couldn't save myself. I set the phone down without replying. There was nothing left to say to Brooke. She was a chapter 1 needed to close, and now I finally had. I had tried to save her once, but I couldn't do it again, not at the cost of everything else. I had learned that lesson the hard way, and it was time to move forward. I finished my coffee, the silence of the house wrapping around me. There was a kind of emptiness. I was beginning to grow accustomed to an emptiness I knew I would eventually have to fill. I couldn't keep living like this, holding on to the past, to ghosts that no longer belonged in my life. I stood up and carried my mug to the sink, pausing as something on the windowsill caught my eye. It was a small potted plant, a succulent Jessica had bought on a whim at the farmer's market months ago. It was supposed to be an easy plant to care for, almost impossible to kill, but I had never been good at keeping things alive. It had started to wither, its leaves browning, and I realized with a pang of guilt that I hadn't even noticed it before. I picked up the pot, cradling it gently. The plant was still alive, barely, and I knew I could revive it if I tried. I turned on the faucet and let the water trickle over the soil, watching as it absorbed into the dry earth, the leaves slowly starting to plump up again. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something like maybe, just maybe, I could still save something in my life. I set the plant back on the windowsill, where it could soak in the morning sunlight. As I looked around the kitchen at the remnants of the life Jessica and I had built together, I realized that while it was over, not everything had to be lost. I still had the pieces, even if they were broken, and maybe it was up to me to decide what to do with them. I wandered through the house room by room, picking up the remnants of our shared life. Jessica's book on the nightstand, her earrings on the dresser, the holiday photo we had taken together. I gathered them all, placing them into a box, and then I sat down, staring at it. It felt like a goodbye one I wasn't ready for, but one I knew I needed. I carried the box to the closet and placed it on the top shelf, out of sight. I wasn't ready to throw those memories away, but I couldn't keep them in front of me anymore, couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't mine. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and then slowly released it. It was time to begin again, to let go of Brooke, of Jessica, and of the person I had been. I needed to figure out who I was now. The road ahead was uncertain, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the only way to truly move forward was to embrace that uncertainty and allow myself to grow from the ruins. I walked back into the kitchen, glancing at the small plant on the windowsill. Its leaves already looked greener, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself a small, cautious smile.